Yes, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for making sure that this was a very balanced hearing today, and I appreciate that, realizing that some of the things that I believe are going to, should be the policies here, don't reflect very many of my fellow members' ideas of what the policy should be. But we're all trying to be honest and trying to make a better world, trying to find a way that we can actually have peace between two of these major countries, the United States and Russia. And I am proud to have played a role in Ronald Reagan's efforts to defeat communism and end the Cold War. And yes, Ronald Reagan's intent to create a new era of friendship between the United States, the people of the United States, and the people of Russia. And I know that Ambassador Matlock played an important role in this as well, and I'm very happy to see him and hear him with us today. Let me just note, I've been watching this for a long time as well, and I am appalled at how the depth that we have let our relationships sink to at this point. We are at a low point at any time since the ending of the Cold War. And I do not believe, as some people have indicated already that they believe, that all of this can be related to Putin. The fact is there has been an unrelenting hostility towards Russia ever from the very days that we were negotiating with them and they were making concessions that led to tearing down the Berlin Wall, that led to the withdrawal of Soviet troops, which were no longer Soviet troops, were Russian troops from Eastern Europe, which led to major arms reduction agreements between our countries. That even during those times, there was an element that hated Russia. Over and over again, we would hear it, and some of them have very good reasons because their family were murdered by communists who happened to be Russians during the Cold War. And also, we had people who just could not get over the fact that it was not Russia that was the enemy in the Cold War, wasn't the Russian people, but was indeed communism that was the enemy. It was the communism that spurred Russia to build these rockets and missiles that threatened us, to support radical elements around the world, to create revolutions in order to establish atheistic communist dictatorships throughout the world. That was communism. That wasn't the Russian people. But yet, there's been thousands of documents that have just recently been declassified. And Mr. Matlock, I want to ask you if you've seen some of these and whether you agree with them, that did say that we actually proposed to the Russians that if they would withdraw their troops from Eastern Europe, that at that point we would not be expanding NATO, and we gave them the impression they would be integrated into the economies of Western Europe and the world. And in either case, there was no ability for the Russians to get into Europe. That's not even a question. But at the same time, we end up expanding NATO. Was there an understanding, although it wasn't written down, that we would not have an expansion of NATO so that Russians would withdraw their troops and troops aimed at their guns at Russia would not go right up to their border? Was that an understanding at that time, Mr. Matlock?
It was indeed the understanding at that time. Now, this was not a legal commitment.
Right.
I must say I testified in the Senate against the original NATO expansion because I thought it was not in the U.S. interest, and I thought it was not necessary to begin to divide Europe again. At the end of the Cold War, we had a Europe whole and free, and that was the objection. You don't keep a Europe whole and free by taking what had been a Cold War alliance, which should have been preserved as it was, and using it by moving the things west. And it was quite predictable then that if we did. So the reason I had for not expanding NATO was the interest of the United States. However, it is quite true that the Bush administration and our allies, particularly our Germans, made statements during German unification that clearly implied that if the Soviet Union did not use force in Eastern Europe and allowed Germany to unite and stay in NATO, there would be no expansion of NATO jurisdiction.
Right. And this,
at one point, Secretary Baker said not 1 inch to the east, and Gorbachev answered that, of course, that would be unacceptable. They were talking about East Germany, but the language was general.
Mr. Chairman,
that was the understanding.
Mr. Mallow,
now, it was not a legal
commitment. If I could jump in here for one moment. That was long before there was ever any Mr. Putin, and in fact, this is long more before any of these, quote, hostile acts that we are being told about happened. That was an indication of what? That people were still going to be treating Russia as if it was the Soviet Union. And so right from the beginning, we've had this incredible hostility that, and just let me note, we have, for example, examples of buzzing, our airplanes right now buzzing, being buzzed by Russian airplanes, our ships out there. The American people see that. Well, where are our ships? The ship that was being buzzed, we've heard this, was in the Baltic Sea, and here it was, I don't know how many miles from St. Petersburg, but why are we sending our U.S. military forces that close to Russia for? We have nuclear weapons delivery systems that are being aimed at Russia. How else would they think of that except as being a hostile act? And for them to buzz a ship to see what kind of ship it was right off their borders. By the way, some of these ships that we have sent there are closer to Russia than Catalina Island is to Los Angeles. What if some nuclear weapons delivery system showed up there? What would we think? Would we send an airplane out to buzz it around and see what kind of ship it is? I think that both sides, both Russia and the United States, need to take a deep breath and step back from this whole military operations that that are actually making things worse rather than making things better. And we need to find out where our differences are, negotiate them, see where we can work together. And Mr. Aaron, thank you very much for your wonderful testimony today, which is aimed at where we need to work together or we're all going to suffer, because radical Islam is the threat today, not the Soviet Union. And so we appreciate you focusing on where we could cooperate, which would be better for both of us. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. And
thank you, Mr. Rohrabacher.
I'll be ready for a second round if we have it.
Okay.